Hello everyone, I'm Ankit and you're watching StudyIQ IAS English. In our today's video, we are going to discuss National Security Act of 1980. Why are we discussing National Security Act? You'll soon find out. Now the notes that I will be using in this particular session, if you want to download them, you can go to this Telegram channel and download the notes. Just open your Telegram app. On the top right hand corner, there's a search bar, right? Click on it and write ATS Live, you'll find the channel. You can download the notes from there. And while you're at it, please do not forget to subscribe to the channel also. Now let us understand the context why we're discussing the National Security Act. How many of you know Sonam Wangchuk, who's a political activist in the Union Territory of Ladakh? Now he was detained recently under the stringent National Security Act by the police of Leh on September the 26th. Now you need to understand the background of this issue. Why was Sonam Wangchuk actually detained? Now you need to understand that Ladakh for a longer period of time has been demanding statehood as well as recognition under the 6th schedule of the Indian Constitution. So the agitation in Ladakh is going on for many demands, including these two demands. Now, because of this agitation, it took a violent turn recently and it led to death of 4 persons and injury to 50 more in the police firing that happened against this demonstration. Now, Union government was of the opinion that it is Sonam Wangchuk who instigated these people to make their protest violent, and that is why he has been detained under the National Security Act, which is an act which enables preventive detention in India. So this brought an issue of what is preventive detention, how is it allowed in a democratic or a constitutional country like India. Everything we'll find out in our today's discussion, okay? Now let us start by looking at the Constitution of India, particularly Article 22 of the Constitution. If you read the provisions of Article 22, it specifically deals with matters relating to preventive detention. It states that a person can be detained even without a trial under preventive detention under the suspicion of certain conditions. But on the other hand, this article of the Indian Constitution also provides certain procedural safeguards so that this power of preventive detention is not misused against any individual. So it includes many criteria under which you can detain a person, and it also includes certain safeguards which are provided to those persons. Okay, first is that the detainees, they will be informed of the grounds under which they have been detained, except when the disclosure is against national security or against public interest. So in usual circumstances, the detainees are told about the reasons why they have been detained until unless the reasons itself violates public interest. Second is that you can't hold these people indefinitely. There needs to be a setup of advisory board, which also includes judges of the High Court, and this advisory board would review the detention at max in 3 weeks time, and you can't hold these people under detention beyond 3 months without the explicit approval of such advisory board. Similarly, Parliament bylaw may prescribe certain conditions in which the maximum detention of the people can exceed 12 months, right? So you need to understand the enabling provision of preventive detention are mentioned in the Constitution, but these provisions are generally regulated by an act passed by Parliament, which includes the National Security Act that we are going to deal with today. Okay, so this is what is relating to constitutional provisions for preventive detention. Once again, it is given in Article 22 of the Constitution. Now let us understand how has preventive detention evolved since the time it was introduced first in India during the colonial term. Now preventive detention has long history in India. It started with the colonial times when Britishers were ruling us. But the intention of preventive detention back then was very different. What was the core intention of British government? It was to control the territories in India and allowing the government and its administrative setup to curtail any kind of freedom or revolutionary movement coming from India. So the intention of preventive detention during the British period was primarily to control dissent so that it would help them control the entire territory of India as well as people inside it. But after independence, the role and the objective of preventive detention changed. After independence, the main cause of concern for government of India was to ensure national security. So the major preventive detention which were brought after the independence, it had primarily the need to control national security of India. So Parliament after India's independence brought Preventive Detention Act 1950. It was followed by a much more disparaged act known as Maintenance of Internal Security Act, MISA Act 1971. How many of you know Lalu Yadav? Now, Lalu Yadav named his daughter Misa Bharti, and the name Misa Bharti was given because of the Act Misa, under which many of the opposition leaders, including Lalu Yadav, they were detained during the emergency period. So you need to understand this Act, Misa Act 1971, became notorious because of the use of these provisions by the then government to control opposition leaders during the emergency period. So after the end of emergency, government repealed this MISA Act and instead in 1980 brought another act, National Security Act, which dealt with provisions of the preventive detention. So this is the act using which the government even today ensures preventive detention of people under certain circumstances. Okay. Now what you have to understand, how is preventive detention regulated under National Security Act? Now the National Security Act 1980 empowers the central government, the state government to detain individuals to prevent them from acting in a manner, or what are those criterias under which you are under preventive detention? That is, if they act in a manner which is prejudicial to their defense of India, it disparages relations of India with any foreign state, it negatively impacts the security of India, or does not enable the government to ensure maintenance of public order and essential supplies. So these are the four criterias under which certain persons can be detained under National Security Act. Why has Sonam Wangchuk been put under preventive detention? So as to ensure maintenance of public order, right? So this is the criteria. Now, in addition to state government and central government, even the district magistrates and police commissioners can exercise the power of preventive detention under the NSA Act. So these are the authorities who are going to give a order for preventive detention of certain persons who are responsible for these four activities, who are acting in a manner which goes against defense of India, who are affecting our relations with foreign countries, who are disparaging security of India, or is not helping the government to maintain public order or supply of essential goods, right? In addition to that, you need to understand preventive detention is something which might appear very similar to arrest, but on the other hand, it is very different from arrest. Arrest of a culprit or arrest of an accused happens after they have committed a crime. But preventive detention, as the name suggests, is a measure to prevent a person from indulging in illegal activity. So as arrest happens after the crime, preventive detention usually would take place before the crime even could happen. So this in a way is preventive measure. It is not a punitive measure, unlike the judicial arrest. And this measure is designed to prevent an individual from committing an act which otherwise is deemed harmful. And what are these acts which are deemed harmful? I've told you in the previous slide. Now, the purpose of NSA, you need to understand, it gives the government wide-ranging powers. It gives the government to deal with threats to national security, threats to existing law and order, and threats to delivery of essential supplies. And it also comes with certain procedural safeguards, as we have already understood. So this is an power to allow the government to prevent any illegal or any harmful act from happening, right? This is not a punitive power, please remember it. Now, what does the National Security Act include? Now, this act provides that you need an order before you can hold any person under preventive detention. So just like before arresting, you need an arrest warrant. Similarly, before putting any person under preventive detention, you need a detention order. So this is executed much similar to how arrests are executed, but I told you the fundamental difference between these two concepts. Now, also you need to understand that once a person is held in specified place, even after the preventive detention starts to take place, they can be moved from one state to another. So for example, radical preacher in Punjab, that is Amritpal Singh, has been detained under preventive detention and has been kept in prison in Assam. Similarly, Sonam Wangchuk, after his preventive detention, was moved to Rajasthan, right? So this is subjected to conditions set by governments, right? Now, what you need to understand that this NSA Act also maintains the ground of detention, which needs to be communicated to the detainees within a period of 5 days and not later than 15 days. But there are certain grounds under public interest where you can not give the details to the detainee under why or as to why they have been detained. Now it also says that the detainee has the right to make an official representation to the government, asking them the reasons and asking them to reconsider their decision of putting him or her under the preventive detention. And an advisory board, which includes High Court judges, must review this case within a period of 3 weeks. And if they are convinced that they have been not put under preventive detention under legible circumstances, so this advisory board may even order the government to release the detainee if there is no sufficient cause for his or her preventive detention. So this is the second procedural safeguard. Third is that the detention cannot ordinarily exceed 12 months, though it can be removed earlier. Now there is also a clause that Parliament of India by law may enable detention over and above the period of 12 months, but this only can be done by Parliament of India. Through which instrument? Through a law passed by Parliament. Now there are certain serious limitations on how National Security Act and more importantly the preventive detention power has been exercised by government in India. First of all, you need to understand the detainee can make an official representation to the government so that the government can reconsider its decision, can reevaluate the circumstances, but still the detainee does not have the right to seek legal representation or physical presence before the advisory board. And government, even during this time, may withhold certain facts from the advisory committee if it fulfills public interest. So whenever a case or a review petition is being heard in a court of law, both sides are there to prevent or to give their arguments. But this is not true in the case of preventive detention. Similarly, these provisions, they leave wide discretionary power in official hands. So for example, officials, if they decide not to give certain details to advisory board will not be in a position to determine whether the preventive detention is rightful or not, right? So this gives a more discretionary power to the government, which sometimes can be misused, right? Similarly, it also allows authorities to hold detainees even without filing a formal charges or even without producing evidences in an open court. So does it means that the principles of natural justice are followed here? Maybe not in every circumstance. So this is the challenge associated with preventive detention. Yes, there are certain conditions under which government can preventively detain some individual, but the kind of judicial recourse available to them are limited, and sometimes it can be prone to misuse. Not that it is misused every time, but it can be misused. Okay. Now, what you have to understand, what are the options remaining for Sonam Wangchuk? Now, Sonam Wangchuk can either challenge the detention order by formally making a representation to the government, as I've already told you, or he can wait for the advisory board to take up his case within the 3 weeks time. Now, you need to understand, if the advisory board finds that there is no sufficient cause or no sufficient evidences, then he or they may allow for release of Sonam Wangchuk. So this is the first judicial recourse that Sonam Wangchuk has. He can either file a review petition or seek formal representation to the government or wait for the advisory board to hear his case. Alternatively, he can directly move to High Court and Supreme Court of India under writ jurisdiction, which is provided under Part 3 of the Constitution, particularly in the Article 32 as well as Article 226 of the Constitution. Now, this provision says that in case your fundamental rights are violated, you can directly approach High Courts and Supreme Court under writ petition, which we have already covered in the polity classes, right? So these are the options that are left with Sonam Wangchuk. He can wait for the procedures to complete, either by formally filing a representation to the government or waiting for the advisory board, or he can directly approach the High Courts and Supreme Court under the clause of violation of fundamental right because of writ jurisdiction. Now, has NSA being used for another individual except Sonam Wangchuk? The answer is yes. For example, in 2023, the radical Sikh preacher, who is also now an MP, Amritpal Singh, he was detained under National Security Act and was shifted to Assam's Dibrugarh jail. Now, you need to understand, in 2024 Lok Sabha elections, he stood for elections while being in captivity, while being under detention, and he even won the election without even moving out and campaigning for himself. So this is the problem, that it has been phase, that Amritpal Singh still under the National Security Act and still under preventive detention and one of the MPs. Similarly, in 2017, there is a political party in UP, Bhim Army. His chief Chandrasekhar Azad, he was booked under National Security Act by the government of Uttar Pradesh. But after reconsideration done in the Supreme Court, this order was removed and he was ordered to be released by the government back in September 2018. Now, basically, you need to understand the issue of preventive detention deals with two things. First is individual liberty. And on the other hand, this individual liberty can be curtailed in certain circumstances, which includes the national security. So on the other hand, there are two issues. First is national security. You need to ensure national security of government. You need to ensure national security of India. And on the other thing, you also have to balance it with individual liberty. So this is the fundamental issue associated with preventive detention. Now, governments, whosoever party is in power, they try to defend this act because they feel that it is a necessary tool to ensure national security. Whereas members of the opposition or critics of the act, they see this as a blunt instrument which is prone to misuse. In what ways, I've already told you. So this is the entire issue associated with National Security Act. Now, before moving to the practice question, I have something I wanted to inform. This is basically the special offer which is given to students just because our StudyIQ IAS channel has completed 2 crore subscribers or 20 million subscribers. So in a special time offer, we are offering 200 students admissions to any of the batches, be it for 26, 2027 or 28, all foundation batches. They are available only for the first 200 students at the rate of 20,000 rupees. And this offer would only last until the filling of these seats. So please hurry up, okay? Now let us try to solve this question. Now in 2018 there was this question on right to privacy. So similarly, I've drafted a question: preventive detention is constitutionally permitted in India. Which one of the following provisions of the constitution correctly and appropriately relate to the statement? The answer is option D, Article 22 and the provisions relating to fundamental rights under Part 3. Preventive detention in India can be authorized for a maximum period of 12 months unless Parliament prescribes otherwise. Through which instruments? Through a law passed by Parliament. So option B here is the right answer. Now in the third question, which of the following statements regarding preventive detention in India is or are correct? Preventive detention can be ordered both during war and peacetime. Is it true? It can be ordered during war, it can be ordered during peacetime, as I've already told you. So the first statement becomes right. The grounds of detention must always be communicated to the detainee with no exceptions. There is an exception, and this exception is called as public interest. So if it is under public interest to not communicate the grounds of detention to the detainee, so this is a legible exception. Therefore, second statement becomes incorrect because there is an exception. Okay. Now, the president has the power to prescribe maximum period of detention. It is incorrect. It is the Parliament of India which has the power to do the same. So, in this regard, third statement also becomes incorrect and we have to identify correct answer. So, option A is your right answer. So, this is how you solve a conceptual question. We did not deal with National Security Act per se in the questions. Rather, we deal with the concept of preventive detention. Okay. Now, once again, the notes of this session will be available on this particular channel. So go ahead, download it, and also do not forget to subscribe it. So this is all from my side. Please have a very good night.